Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee by Dee Brown is not just a history book, it's a reckoning. This deeply moving work pulls back the veil on one of the most painful and overlooked chapters in American history, the systematic destruction of Native American cultures during the westward expansion from 1860 to 1890. Through Native voices, often silenced or misrepresented, Brown crafts a poignant and powerful narrative of resilience, loss, and betrayal. By weaving together first-hand accounts, council records, and oral histories, the book becomes more than a historical document. It's a memorial to cultures torn apart by greed, violence, and broken promises. The book flips the script on the familiar myths of the American West. Gone are the glorified tales of pioneers and manifest destiny. Instead, we see the devastating consequences of this expansion on the indigenous nations who called the land their home. Tribes such as the Sioux, Cheyenne, Apache, and Nez Perce are brought vividly to life not as obstacles to progress, but as vibrant societies with their own customs, leaders, and deep spiritual connections to the land. Figures like Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, Red Cloud, and Cochise emerge not as caricatures of history but as deeply human leaders, warriors, and visionaries, striving to preserve their people's way of life against insurmountable odds. This is a book that does not shy away from the harsh realities of history. It tells of massacres, forced relocations, and the exploitation of native lands for profit. Yet it is also a story of incredible strength and resilience, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming loss, the human spirit endures. Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee is more than a history, it's a voice for the voiceless, a call to acknowledge the injustices of the past, and a lesson that remains painfully relevant today. Dee Brown's Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee situates its harrowing narrative within the critical historical period of 1860 to 1890, an era defined by relentless westward expansion under the banner of manifest destiny. This ideology, the belief that it was the divine right and destiny of white Americans to expand across the North American continent, served as both justification and motivation for the conquest of indigenous lands. Framed as progress and civilization, manifest destiny led to the systematic displacement, exploitation, and near eradication of Native American tribes. What was painted in schoolbooks as pioneering triumph was, in reality, a brutal campaign of conquest rooted in greed and disregard for native sovereignty and humanity. The timeline of 1860 to 1890 captures the darkest years of this expansion. During this period, federal policies like the Indian Removal Act and military campaigns violently pushed native nations from their ancestral homelands to make way for settlers, railroads, and industries. Treaties, often coerced or signed under duress, were broken as soon as they clashed with American interests. Forced relocations like the Trail of Tears became symbols of government betrayal, while massacres such as those at Sand Creek and Wounded Knee highlighted the ruthless efforts to suppress resistance. This was an era when entire nations were forced into reservations, their cultural practices outlawed, and their very survival threatened. Traditionally, this history was written by settlers, focusing on the heroism of pioneers and soldiers while portraying Native Americans as obstacles to progress. Rarely did indigenous voices appear in the historical record, and when they did, they were often filtered through the biases of white interpreters or journalists. Brown's groundbreaking approach in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee shifts the narrative entirely. Drawing from Native oral histories, government records, and first-hand accounts, he tells the story from the perspective of the tribes themselves. This perspective is a revelation, challenging myths and exposing the devastating impact of manifest destiny on indigenous peoples. The book's emotionally charged narrative serves not just as a history, but as a memorial for cultures pushed to the brink of extinction, bringing to light voices that were too often silenced by history. The historical context of Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee naturally sets the stage for the book's major themes, which delve into the profound emotional and cultural scars left by westward expansion. Dee Brown's narrative unflinchingly examines the price paid by Native American tribes during the 1860 to 1890 period, exploring themes of loss, betrayal, resistance, and resilience that echo throughout history and continue to resonate today. At the heart of the book lies the devastating loss of Native American land and culture. For generations, indigenous tribes had lived in harmony with their environment, viewing the land not as a commodity to be owned but as a sacred trust shared among people and with the natural world. The arrival of settlers driven by the ideology of manifest destiny shattered this worldview, reducing the rich and vibrant ecosystems of native homelands to mere economic resources. Brown's narrative recounts the ceaseless waves of displacement as tribes were pushed from their ancestral territories into increasingly inhospitable lands or onto reservations designed to marginalize and control them. Sacred sites, hunting grounds, and burial places were desecrated or destroyed outright. This loss extended beyond geography. It severed tribes from their traditions, spiritual practices, and the foundation of their identities. The systematic eradication of buffalo herds, a cornerstone of life for Plains tribes, was both a deliberate strategy to force submission and a catastrophic cultural loss, reducing self-sufficient nations to starvation and dependency. Despite the overwhelming odds stacked against them, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee also highlights the fierce resistance of indigenous leaders who fought tirelessly to preserve their people's way of life. Figures like Sitting Bull, Red Cloud, Crazy Horse, Chief Joseph, and Cochise emerge not as the savage caricatures perpetuated by myths of the American West but as profoundly human leaders with courage, vision, and determination. Their acts of defiance, whether through armed resistance, strategic diplomacy, or the formation of alliances, are a testament to their unyielding resolve to protect their lands and cultures from annihilation. The book brings to life their heroic battles, including iconic events like the Battle of the Little Bighorn and the Nez Perce's remarkable but ultimately tragic flight toward freedom. Through Brown's meticulous recounting, these leaders are given the dignity and recognition long denied them by traditional histories, becoming symbols of resistance against oppression. A recurring thread throughout the book is the theme of betrayal, embodied by the countless broken treaties and promises made by the U.S. government. Time and again, agreements that guaranteed tribes peace, protection, or secure lands were abandoned as soon as they became inconvenient to settlers or politicians. These treaties, often negotiated under duress or outright deceit, were presented as mutual agreements but overwhelmingly served the interests of white expansionists. Brown vividly portrays how the ink on these documents was scarcely dry before settlers encroached on native lands once again, with government officials either looking the other way or actively supporting the violations. The book details moments of profound betrayal, from the forced removal of the Cherokee on the Trail of Tears to the desecration of the Black Hills despite its guaranteed protection under the Treaty of Fort Laramie. These betrayals did not only violate agreements, they shattered any trust between native nations and the U.S. government, deepening the wounds of displacement and oppression. Yet amidst this unrelenting tragedy, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee offers a powerful exploration of resilience. Despite unimaginable losses, native peoples endured. Their stories, traditions, and cultural practices survived through the efforts of those who refused to let their identities be erased. The book shines a light on moments of quiet defiance, such as the Ghost Dance movement, which emerged as both a spiritual and cultural revival for tribes facing the brink of extinction. While the movement ultimately led to the massacre at Wounded Knee in 1890, it also demonstrated the profound strength of indigenous peoples in reclaiming hope and meaning even in the face of oppression. Brown's work serves as both an elegy and a celebration, reminding readers that Native American history is not solely a story of suffering but one of survival, dignity, and strength. Even in the most harrowing moments, Native peoples found ways to adapt, resist, and preserve their heritage. Today, their resilience can be seen in the cultural revivals and sovereignty movements that continue to push back against historical erasure and modern injustices. The book challenges readers to acknowledge the enduring consequences of America's past, while honoring the strength and humanity of the native nations who withstood it. In Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, Dee Brown dismantles the myth of the American West as a tale of triumph and progress, replacing it with a sobering narrative of conquest and loss. By centering indigenous perspectives, he amplifies voices that were long silenced or distorted, reframing the history of the United States through the eyes of those who suffered most from its expansion. The themes of loss, resistance, betrayal, and resilience not only define the book's narrative but also echo as timeless lessons about justice, human dignity, and the importance of confronting uncomfortable truths. Brown's masterpiece is not just a history, it is a call to remember, to reflect, and to ensure that the stories of Native Americans are no longer relegated to the margins but remain central to the American story. In Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, Dee Brown weaves a tapestry of key events that reveal the harrowing struggles of Native American tribes as they faced the systematic destruction of their cultures and homelands. Among these pivotal moments, the Long Walk of the Navajos stands as one of the most devastating examples of forced relocation. The Navajos, led by figures like Manolito and Barboncito, were a proud people rooted in their ancestral lands, which provided them with sustenance and spiritual connection. However, under the orders of General James Carleton and with Kit Carson's enforcement, their livestock and crops were destroyed in a calculated scorched earth campaign. Faced with starvation and hopelessness, thousands were forced to march hundreds of miles to the barren Bosque Redondo Reservation in New Mexico. Known as the Long Walk, this journey claimed countless lives due to exposure, hunger, and exhaustion. For those who survived, Bosque Redondo offered no refuge. Its harsh landscape and inadequate resources symbolized the government's apathy toward the lives it uprooted. The Long Walk remains a chilling reminder of how relocation policies decimated Native communities and stripped them of their dignity. Little Crow's War unfolds as a tale of resistance that underscores the desperation and courage of the Sioux people. In 1862, the Dakota Sioux, confined to reservations and cheated out of promised food and supplies by corrupt Indian agents, found themselves on the brink of starvation. Little Crow, a leader caught between pragmatism and rebellion, ultimately chose to fight against the injustices his people endured. The uprising began with the Dakota attacking settler outposts, driven by a combination of anger, despair, and a determination to reclaim their land. While they achieved initial victories, the U.S. military's response was swift and brutal. The rebellion ended in tragedy, with hundreds of Sioux executed or imprisoned and many more forced westward. Little Crow's War highlights not just the immediate suffering of the Dakota people but also the broader pattern of broken treaties and systematic oppression that crushed Native resistance. The massacre at Wounded Knee in December 1890 serves as the book's emotional and symbolic conclusion, encapsulating the ultimate betrayal and loss faced by Native Americans. The Ghost Dance movement, a spiritual revival that promised the return of buffalo and the restoration of native lands, had spread hope among tribes who had lost so much. However, this peaceful religious movement was misunderstood and feared by U.S. officials, who saw it as a threat to their control. Tensions came to a head when Chief Bigfoot's band of Lakota sought refuge at Wounded Knee Creek. There, surrounded by U.S. soldiers, they were disarmed under the guise of maintaining peace. A single gunshot, whether accidental or deliberate, triggered chaos, and the soldiers opened fire on the unarmed men, women, and children. By the end of the massacre, over 200 Lakota lay dead in the snow. The massacre at Wounded Knee symbolized the violent culmination of decades of policies aimed at erasing Native cultures and eliminating indigenous resistance. It marked the end of the so-called Indian Wars and left an indelible scar on American history. Through these events, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee conveys the profound suffering, courage, and resilience of Native peoples. Brown's vivid storytelling ensures that these chapters of history, often overlooked or simplified, are remembered for their emotional weight and historical significance. Each of these moments illustrates not just the loss endured by Native tribes but also the enduring strength of their spirit in the face of relentless oppression. In Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, Dee Brown masterfully brings to life the personal stories of Native American leaders whose courage, wisdom, and resilience shine against the dark backdrop of oppression and betrayal. Figures like Sitting Bull, Standing Bear, and Chief Joseph emerge not merely as historical characters but as deeply human figures fighting for the survival of their people and their way of life. Sitting Bull, the great Lakota leader, stands as a symbol of unyielding defiance. A man of profound spiritual conviction and tactical brilliance, he dedicated his life to resisting the relentless encroachment of settlers on Sioux lands. Sitting Bull's role in the victory at the Battle of the Little Bighorn remains legendary. He foresaw the triumph in a vision of soldiers falling like grasshoppers into a Lakota camp. Yet, this victory only deepened the U.S. government's determination to crush the Sioux. Sitting Bull's later years were marked by his struggle to hold on to the remnants of his people's independence, even as he reluctantly sought refuge in Canada and ultimately returned to the U.S., where he was confined to a reservation. His death in 1890, during a botched arrest fueled by fears of the ghost dance movement, remains one of the most tragic symbols of the government's inability to understand or respect Native sovereignty. Through his life and speeches, Sitting Bull conveyed the enduring wisdom of his people. The white man knows how to make everything, but he does not know how to distribute it. Standing Bear's story, by contrast, is one of personal resilience and a fight for legal recognition of Native humanity. As a Ponca chief, Standing Bear faced the forced removal of his people from their homeland in Nebraska to Indian Territory in Oklahoma, a journey that claimed many lives, including that of his son. When he sought to return to Nebraska to bury his son in their sacred land, Standing Bear was arrested. His subsequent court case became a defining moment in U.S. legal history. Standing Bear's poignant courtroom speech remains unforgettable. That hand is not the color of yours, but if I prick it, the blood will flow, and I shall feel pain. The blood is of the same color as yours. God made me, and I am a man. His victory in the trial established, for the first time, that Native Americans were legally recognized as persons under U.S. law, a small but significant triumph in a sea of injustices. Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce is remembered for his eloquence, his commitment to peace, and his extraordinary leadership during his people's desperate flight to escape forced removal. When the U.S. government broke its promise to allow the Nez Perce to remain in their ancestral lands in the Wallowa Valley, Chief Joseph led his people on a grueling 1,400-mile retreat toward Canada, seeking refuge and freedom. Pursued relentlessly by the U.S. Army, the Nez Perce fought bravely, outmaneuvering their pursuers time and again. Yet, the journey ended just 40 miles from the Canadian border, where the starving and exhausted Nez Perce were forced to surrender. Chief Joseph's surrender speech, one of the most poignant and quoted in American history, captures the depth of his heartbreak. I am tired of fighting. Our chiefs are killed, it is cold, and we have no blankets. The little children are freezing to death. My heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever. Despite his efforts to negotiate for his people's return to their homeland, Joseph spent the rest of his life advocating for justice, only to see his pleas repeatedly ignored. Through these leaders, Brown captures not just the history of Native resistance but also the profound humanity of those who stood against overwhelming odds. Their stories are not just about loss but about enduring hope, unbroken dignity, and the determination to preserve their people's spirit and culture. Sitting Bull, Standing Bear, and Chief Joseph each leave behind legacies of resilience that resonate far beyond their lifetimes, reminding us of the strength of those who refuse to let their voices be silenced. Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee is more than a history book, it's a profound lesson in justice, humanity, and the power of historical accountability. Dee Brown takes us beyond the romanticized myths of the American West and forces us to confront the painful realities that shaped it, a reality of broken treaties, forced removals, and the systematic destruction of entire cultures. As readers, we are compelled to ask difficult questions about the price of progress and whose voices have been left out of the stories we've been taught. One of the most striking lessons of this book is its emphasis on justice or the lack of it. The Native American leaders we meet in these pages, figures like Sitting Bull, Standing Bear, and Chief Joseph, did not fight merely for land or resources. They fought for their people's survival, for their dignity, and for promises that were repeatedly broken. Their stories highlight how deeply injustice can wound, not just individuals, but entire nations. And yet, through these wounds, we also see resilience, a determination to preserve culture, identity, and humanity against insurmountable odds. The book invites us to reflect on what justice truly means when it comes too late, if it comes at all. At its core, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee is also a call for humanity. It strips away the stereotypes that have long dehumanized Native Americans in popular narratives. Instead, it reveals them as parents, leaders, warriors, and spiritual figures, people who loved their land, their children, and their way of life just as deeply as anyone else. By telling their stories in their voices, Brown ensures that their humanity is undeniable, forcing readers to empathize with their struggles and mourn their losses. Perhaps the most lasting impact of this book is how it reshapes our understanding of American history. It challenges the idea that the westward expansion was an unmitigated triumph, showing instead how it was built on violence, displacement, and cultural erasure. It's a sobering reminder that history is not just a collection of facts, it's a story shaped by those who choose what to tell and what to omit. Brown's work fills in some of those silences, but it also leaves us with a responsibility, to listen, to learn, and to recognize the ongoing consequences of this history. For Native American communities, the struggles depicted in the book are not confined to the past. Issues of land sovereignty, cultural preservation, and systemic inequality persist today. Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee urges us to think critically about how we can support Indigenous peoples in their fight for justice and equality. It's not just a history lesson, it's a call to action. As we reflect on the lessons of this book, it challenges us to see history through a more empathetic and honest lens. It reminds us that progress cannot come at the expense of others, that justice delayed is often justice denied, and that the humanity of every person and culture must be acknowledged and honored. Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee is not just a story of loss, it's a testament to resilience and a plea for us to never look away from the hard truths of our shared history. In doing so, it inspires us to work toward a future where all voices are heard and all histories are valued. Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee is more than a book, it's a powerful tribute to the lives, cultures, and histories of Native American peoples. Dee Brown's work has become a cornerstone in understanding the truth about America's westward expansion and its devastating impact on Indigenous communities. It forces us to look beyond the myths and confront the reality of injustice, loss, and resilience that shaped this land. By giving a voice to those who were silenced and sharing their stories with compassion and honesty, the book preserves a crucial part of history that we must never forget. If you haven't read Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, I encourage you to pick it up and immerse yourself in its pages. It's not just a history lesson, it's a call to reflect on the past, acknowledge its consequences, and find ways to support Indigenous communities today. Whether you're new to this history or looking to deepen your understanding, this book is a profound starting point. Let it inspire you to learn more about the struggles and resilience of Native peoples, past and present. Thank you for joining me in exploring this important book. If you found this video meaningful, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and share your reflections or any questions you have. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more book summaries, historical insights, and thought-provoking content. Together, we can continue to honor stories like these and ensure they're never forgotten. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.